and welcome again to another episode of Complimentary Cinema at the O&M Stockroom.
My name is Ken.
And I'm your other host, Brian McGarry. And tonight for Complimentary Cinema, we'll be talking about the 2003 TV movie film, Deep Shock.
That is correct.
So, a couple things about Complimentary Cinema if you're new to the program. We like to talk about movies that you can find for free on the internet and watch stream without any charge. This film's currently available on YouTube with a lot of ads, so you definitely might want to use an ad blocker if you don't like ads, but I'm sure that they would prefer that you did not use an ad blocker. And another little caveat with Complimentary Cinema, we do massive spoilers.
Yes.
So just want to make sure that that's known and understood before you continue listening to us blab on about this film.
If you're really worried about the ending of Deep Shock, please go watch it first and then come back and listen to this. If it's really going to make a big difference in your life to know the ending of this film.
Having watched this film, Ken,
or any details about this film at all.
That's good advice, definitely. I will say, though, having watched this film, my life might be slightly worse. Certainly not better by knowing this film in detail as we do now.
Maybe your life has been made better by it temporarily being made worse.
I'm just going to go ahead and roll with that and say that's good. Yeah.
Maybe the worsening of our lives has somehow bettered our worst lives. And on that note, so let's talk about this movie for a little bit. So Deep Shock. So first of all, let's talk about how you selected this film. What were the criteria?
So the criteria that I used to select this film, which I think we'll probably be going with here on out in the future, is A, you can find it for free on the internet, and B, I picked it based on the poster and the title. I went into this film knowing literally nothing else about it. I didn't watch a trailer, which I believe you watched.
Yes. So you told me the name of the movie. So I went and just found a 1-minute trailer on YouTube. And about 10 seconds into watching the trailer, I immediately texted Brian back and said, "Yes, this is the movie."
It's the movie, yeah. So we're just gonna be picking them. Just does it look good or sound good? And by good, I mean plausibly interesting. Something I've never heard of. Something just kind of random and out there. And that's basically our criteria.
Yeah, and I mean going along with the other theme of a bunch of completely different kinds of movies. Nothing relating them other than the fact they're free, and that's about it.
We like our free movies, especially in these unprecedented times.
Yes, absolutely.
Financial, economic, and medical duress that we're all going through right now.
I mean, we're looking out for the viewer here. We really are. Or the listener, I guess.
The listeners that will become viewers.
Maybe.
If they enjoy our takes on these films.
I mean, we'll see after this review.
We'll see. So, a little backstory on this film. So, it was made in 2003. It was a TV movie released on the Sci-Fi Network, produced by DEJ Productions, Unified Film Organization, and Eel Productions.
Yes.
The director is a Philip J. Roth. I want to say Philip J. Fry, but we're not so lucky.
Mm-hmm.
The Philip J. Roth, who has done innumerable crap TV movies, including Falcon Down, which I think was his answer to Black Hawk Down.
Yes, there are a number of movies that are direct ripoffs of other popular at the time movies.
And this film is definitely a ripoff of some other well-known films. So it's an underwater film.
Yeah.
And it's probably the two films it rips off are The Abyss and I wanted to say Deep Impact, but it's not Deep Impact. It's the with one, Samuel L. Jackson and like Sharon Stone.
So the sharks, right?
Something.
It was Deep Blue Sea.
Deep Blue Sea.
Yeah.
There you go. So this film's a ripoff of The Abyss and Deep Blue Sea, and a god-awful one at that. And Leviathan.
I was going to say,
a little bit.
With some hints of some of those submarine movies, that's
where The Abyss comes in, because there's a little bit of that in there.
Yeah.
But and also, like, did you ever see Leviathan from 1989?
I don't think so.
Peter Weller film, the guy who played RoboCop, that takes place underwater in a scientific lab. And,
Okay.
There's all kinds of, sci-fi fuckery afoot.
Okay.
So that's a good one.
And then you've also got the kind of trope of these TV movies. A lot of them they made with weird other monsters as like like your famously like Sharknado or
Sure.
like, things that really shouldn't be the big bad monster that are for some reason.
It's almost like they took a bunch of just random animals, put them in a hat, and they'd pick one and be like, okay, so that's our monster of the week. Now, if you couldn't figure out from the name of one of the production companies, Eel Productions, the big monster in this film is a big electric eel. Multiple electric eels.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of them.
There's a lot of them, but more on that later. So, do you want to give us a breakdown of the opening synopsis for this, Ken?
So to start this movie, we start at the UN. Oh no, actually, to start this movie, we start in a submarine, and they're conducting some kind of research / attack.
A military exercise.
Yes, it is a military submarine, and there's an unknown something in the water, and there's a whole bunch of like, it's coming right for us. Are we going to shoot it? And at the last second, they decide to shoot at it, and then we cut away.
Very abruptly, I might add.
We don't know what happened to this crew of some kind of American military crew.
The USS Jimmy Carter is the name of the submarine in question in this particular scene, and my God, does the name Jimmy Carter strike heart into the fear of men?
Named for war-loving President Jimmy Carter.
The militaristic,
The Iron Fist.
hawkish, brutal Jimmy Carter.
So anyway.
So they cut away from so they kind of leave us on a sort of cliffhanger as to what becomes of this submarine, what becomes of this crew.
Yeah. And we immediately cut to aftermath.
They immediately cut to the aftermath at the United Nations. One of the great things about this film is that they have a gigantic title card for every single location that takes up the entire screen when you go to a new location. My favorite part is when it's the 5th or 6th time visiting that location, and they give you the title card each and every single time.
Yes. They've already established that we are going to the United Nations. We've seen the person from the United Nations speak at least 5 times, and they still put the United Nations card before this, and not before the scene either.
Like
as
a few
the scene
seconds
is
into
rolling.
it. Yeah.
Yes. So this is the first time we've seen it, and we don't exactly know what we're in for, and it just continues throughout the film.
Well, it's like, like if you watch, high quality shows like Jag, or, say even like a Hunt for Red October, other like military based entertainment, like in like a little corner of the screen, they'll give you like a little, like a little indication of like what ship they're on or where they're at, and maybe like, like 0800 hours Zulu time or something. But you don't get any of that. You just get a gigantic black screen with huge white text
Plus,
telling you where you are.
you only ever do it the first time.
You should only ever do it the first time.
Because then the second time you're like, oh, yeah, we're at the United Nations. This is where all the people are, and there's a bunch of flags in the background, and this is the same person we've seen talking several times already.
Yeah, you would think like, maybe the second time I could understand just to really like pound home the point. But the third time, the fourth time, the fifth time, is it still necessary?
It was unnecessary the second time. It already stood out the second time.
It was unnecessary the second time, but I could forgive the second time. The third time was absolutely unforgivable.
Yes.
Yes.
I was rethinking my life choices by the time we got to the third one, and then we got to the fourth and fifth. But anyway. We went to the United Nations, which is a auditorium at a community college, it looks like. It doesn't
a pretty nice one, actually.
It doesn't look anything like the United Nations, but they put a bunch of flags on stage, and they put a podium, and they put like some people that are supposed to be like like security council, and they're all sitting out in the audience in these chairs.
In theater chairs.
In theater chairs. That are like bright orange.
Like you would see like at a community college theater.
So anyway, and they've used this set. I struggle to even call it a set because eventually they turn the stage into what is like the command center.
The United Nations Command Center.
And it's the same stage still.
It's the same stage and the same walls.
They just shot it a little different way to make it look like it's in an office instead of...
It was a great use of the $20 budget that this film had.
Yes, it took them like one afternoon and one set to film like all of those scenes. So it was a good use of budget.
Maybe 2 afternoons, Ken. Let's give them a little credit.
An afternoon and a half.
Afternoon and a half. So at the United Nations, a Dr. Anne Fletcher, portrayed by Australian actress Simone McKinnon, is giving a speech talking about issues happening up in the North Pole relating to global warming, the melting of the caps. And she gets into it with a fellow doctor, Chomsky, portrayed by Mark Shepard, whom some of you may know from Firefly, Battlestar Galactica, Star Trek Voyager. A really great character actor who's been in all kinds of stuff. One of the few actual actors that I actually knew in this film. And they get into it for a little bit, and essentially she's trying to say that there's some weird transmissions coming from the North Pole that are causing the problems that are occurring, while Dr. Chomsky is saying, well, he's not really giving an alternate perspective on what's going on, but he's basically discrediting Dr. Fletcher.
Well, he was basically saying that his solution was they just needed to close the trench. If they just closed it up, then the problem would go away, because whatever the problem is coming out of the trench. So if you just close it up on the surface, then you're fine.
So in Dr. Fletcher's analysis, there was a trench producing the transmissions. So like any good American militant person, they just want to blow it up and shoot it to solve the problem.
Now, I just want to point out, he's not American either.
He's not, but he has the American mentality. So during the course of this meeting, they basically decide that Dr. Fletcher should no longer be involved in the research going on in the North Pole, and they ship her off to somewhere. Meanwhile, there's a base at the North Pole that is conducting further experiments and wants to send nukes into this magic trench where all the bad things are happening. And the name of this facility is called Hubris.
There was immediate eye rolling. The fact that they named this station Hubris.
Should we give the folks the definition of hubris at this time, Ken?
That would be great.
Okay. So a quick Google search. Hubris is the characteristic of excessive confidence or arrogance, which leads a person to believe that he or she may do no wrong. The overwhelming pride caused by hubris is often considered a flaw in character. And that is the name of this scientific installation.
Now, why would anyone name... It's not even just scientific, though. It's military.
It's a military...
It is scientific, but it's
a military scientific operation.
Right. Why would you name that station that? That would be the last thing you would want to name any of those things.
That would be the last thing that any reasonable person, any reasonable author of such a TV film would maybe reconsider. Like, you might put the hubris in as like a fill-in name for the installation prior to, coming up with a final actual screen used name. And I think somewhere along the way, they just decided, we're just going to keep hubris and we're just going to roll with that.
And not only is it named Hubris, but it is painted in the brightest paint you could possibly think of right on the front of the station.
Yes.
In giant letters.
And so here's the great thing about this station. It is largely underwater with a little bit poking through the North Polar ice. So it's an underwater facility. And as we're being introduced to this station, we see a lot of middle-aged, half-bald men operating the facility. There was a lot of that also on the submarine Jimmy Carter as well. Just as a side note, I just thought it was interesting. They had a casting type, I think. Just a lot of young boys who grew up into faded old men who wanted to live some of their glory dreams of being like a military badass. I think that's who they casted for this. So at some point, one of the gentlemen in charge of the station, he's like a second in command, decides that, hey, we're not going to just nuke this thing.
Well, and the reason is because he knew what the original scientist lady,
He was in cahoots with Dr. Fletcher a little bit.
he knew about her research and he believed it. So he wanted, let's give it another chance.
Sure.
But yeah, they didn't want to let that happen.
They didn't want to let that happen. So what does happen is, on this underwater pressurized station full of metal, they decide to have a shootout in a nuclear weapon torpedo room. Let's just say that again for everyone listening. They had a shootout in an underwater pressurized nuclear torpedo room.
And that was like the plan. Like they planned to go in there and do that. It's not like it just happened.
Like the people went in there under orders to shoot him
Yeah.
and kill him in an underwater pressurized nuclear torpedo room.
Surprisingly, that all went fine.
It did go fine. No structural damage at all
They just shot him
to
and
the
he
craft.
died.
Yeah, so they shoot him, and his name is not important. He's just a throwaway character, and then they move on. So soon, the station, they launch their nukes. The entities that inhabit the trench awaken and stop the torpedoes, and then because the entities in question are badly animated electric eels, they just come and electrocute everybody and fry everyone, and the United Nations loses contact with the station.
Now, since we're to a little bit more of this part, let's talk a little bit more about the animation.
Let's talk a little bit about the animation.
Because this was
Ken.
really our first view. Up until this point, we had not a whole lot of animation with like the submarine at the beginning, just like a little bit, and not enough that it was like embarrassing. And then we get to the station, and we get to the eels. And this is when it becomes really apparent that this movie is not...
not quite up to spec, is it?
It's not artistic.
Not artistic and not well funded either.
My first thought immediately was like, this would have been a lot cheaper if they had made a model, and it would have looked better than what they got.
Yeah, so apparently originally the animation team for the Eels was going to be like this nice American team. And then they decided they didn't want to flesh out that much money, so they hired a more inexpensive Bulgarian team.
Yes.
So these are inexpensive Bulgarian underwater electric eels, and that they look exactly like you would just imagine just now.
They look very bad.
They look incredibly bad. And
this is the first time we're seeing them. You see them clearly. It's not like they're obscured or in the shadows.
There's no buildup at all. None.
You see them.
Like you see them.
Yeah.
Like practically wearing a top hat and a cane, like they're there on stage in the spotlight, so to speak.
Yeah. So that's a great way to build tension about your main monster.
Absolutely. I love...
Just show them in the first act.
I love having everything revealed right away, nothing being left to the imagination.
Yep.
So those are the eels. And here's another great thing about these eels. Well, not necessarily about the eels, but about the animation. Quite a few times we see water in this film, being set underwater, things leak. There's, hull compromises, there's hull breaches, water sprays. So this movie's set underwater. There's not an actual drop of water in the film. Every single time we see water is animated.
Yes.
And terribly.
There was one scene where they splashed some people when he was trying to close the door and water was splashing in. I think that was real water.
Okay, so that
was
real
it.
water.
That was a guy on the other side of the door splashing a bucket of water in.
Just chucking a bucket. Yeah. Just some of these other scenes, it's like they could have gotten a garden hose and like had a guy like take his thumb and like just kind of press down on the opening to like make it like spray hard. They didn't even bother doing that.
No.
On a couple of times where that might even have been slightly effective.
And like the animation for those scenes was the same animation every time. Whenever there was water coming down the hall,
yeah, it was the same.
It was the same animation. It wasn't even they didn't even modify it at all. It was the same pattern of water coming.
It's like they just decided like, that looks good. We're just going to roll with it. Let's
and paste.
Copy and paste. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I stand corrected. So there is a few drops of water.
Very little. for an underwater movie.
So so in The Abyss, James Cameron filled some unused nuclear silos with just untold gallons and filmed underwater. Like there's maybe what would you say? There's maybe a liter of water in this film.
Easily, yeah.
About a liter.
A spray bottle.
A spray bottle. A gentle misting.
One healthy bucket of water.
A healthy bucket of water. Okay, so maybe a gallon. Maybe a gallon. Gallon tops.
I mean, enough that the guy is like, oh, the water's so cold, I need to take my shirt off.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right.
But he didn't even get that wet either.
Yeah, he really didn't. And he seemed kind of a pansy for taking off one of his two shirts.
Anyway.
But anyway. So they lose contact with the station. Let's backtrack just a moment. So when the guy's having the standoff in the torpedo room, he's like, I just want to make a phone call. And one of them gives him a phone and he calls Dr. Fletcher, who is running in the woods in DC.
Right.
Or maybe it's a park.
It does say DC though.
It does say
has
DC.
A card.
It does say DC. We get another one of those famous title cards. So it says DC, and she's running in the snow in what appears to be the woods.
Yeah.
And they talk on the phone while that exchange is going. So after he dies, and they lose contact with the station, they decide, oh my God, we need Dr. Fletcher, and we need to go back to the Hubris and figure out what's gone wrong and what's going on. And they find her skiing in the snow, in the woods.
Cross-country skiing.
Cross-country skiing in Maine, in what looks pretty much to be the exact same location.
Now, I'm not an expert here, but the first scene she was in United Nations, which is in fact in New York.
Yes.
Then she was in DC running in the woods.
A very short time later, yes.
Then she was in Maine skiing.
Yes.
Should she not have been in New York for all these things?
You would assume, but let's just assume that so you could stretch credibility to say that maybe the events away from her took place over a period of say 3 or 4 days. They did seem to take place in fairly quick succession, but let's say that we could draw them out just like 3 or 4 days. Let's just, for the sake of argument, let's say that all those events, the submarine, the Hubris getting attacked, her being picked up in Maine, let's say that that's a full week. What is this recently unemployed doctor doing just traveling around the Northeast? Just for funsies, exercise?
Just exercising.
So she was in New York and Central Park isn't good enough for her?
Well, and did she run to Maine? Did she ski to Maine?
She may have.
Has this been one long journey?
But it's if you're in New York, why go to DC and then up to Maine?
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
That doesn't make sense.
And you didn't even need to. The thing is, like you said, it looks like the same place. You didn't even need to have a place name. You could have just cut back to her and okay, she's running in the woods somewhere.
Yeah. See, the only reason we know that the snowy woods area was in DC and then in Maine is because this television movie made a point to tell us.
Yes, the obnoxious title cards.
We should have counted how many there were in the entire film. But I, for one, am not going to go back and watch to find out.
I know we went to the United Nations at least 5 times.
Yeah.
It may have been 6.
Yeah.
I think that was the one that was used the most.
Yeah.
And then the other one
there's got to be 15 to 20 title cards in this film.
The other one,
if I just had to guess,
that really hit me. We'll get into it later. But there was one point where when we went to the United Nations, we waited for it because we knew it was coming and cheered.
We actually cheered when we saw the title card. That was great.
That was about the 4th time, I think.
Yeah, fourth. Yeah, that was toward the end, but not the last. Not the last. I think that was the penultimate United Nations title card.
Anyway, so we pick up the scientist lady.
We pick up Dr. Fletcher in Maine.
They say we're going to give you another shot because what we didn't work, but the opposing scientist is also going along on this journey.
Yeah, bitch ass McFuckface, I think his name is in this one.
And also the person who picked up the scientist lady, it turns out is her ex. And he's Mr. Military Man. He's a captain.
He's super square-jawed, butt-chin David Keith.
Yes.
Playing Captain Rains.
So we've finally been introduced to our other main player. and he's coming along. And he has a history.
He's actually top to build in this piece of junk.
Yeah.
Top build. And for a minute, I thought it was Robert Wall or Robert Wurr. I can't remember the guy's name. I thought it was the journalist guy from, the first Batman movie with Michael Keaton, Vicky Vale's colleague. I thought it was him because they kind of have the same look, but this guy's a little more macho and a little more chiseled in his expression. And he was in Officer and a Gentleman with Richard Gere, if you remember that film. Came out in 1982. I think that's this guy's other big claim to fame. So another actual actor. We have a couple in here. They just wanted to work, so they picked this one up. It's kind of like when you're unemployed and you're getting unemployment benefits, but you still have to prove that you're like actually looking for work. I think this is that kind of movie for actors.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, I guess maybe top billing, they might have actually got paid something.
He might have, yeah. Just a little taste.
Because we all know the rest of this didn't cost much to make.
No, it sure didn't. So they pick her up in Maine.
Yeah.
In the woods, in the snow in Maine.
Yeah.
And then they take her back to the United Nations to show her a computer screen.
They sure do.
And then they talk about, hey, well, there's a flight waiting for us in Bangor, Maine. So then they go back to Maine to head to the North Pole.
It's almost as if like they thought they were going to have it in one order, and then they rearranged the order of how things happened.
It's possible. Or they wanted to portray these characters as like globe-trotting, jet-setting badasses.
Yeah. I don't know.
With how badly this is filmed, And it's anyone's guess. It's anyone's guess.
But in any regard, they're going to get this flight to the North Pole.
So they get on this plane.
And then we get the traveling red line montage.
Straight out of Indiana Jones.
Yes.
You get the red line moving forward towards the North Pole. And then what happens? What happens?
But you do that when you're going to a new and exotic location, right?
Yes.
You would do that in a film.
Yes, you would.
We have already been to the North Pole twice.
In this film. This is true.
Twice.
We
know exactly where we're going.
They've talked about it at length.
We even know what the entire base looks like. We've already seen the entire inside of this thing.
There's nothing left to be revealed, and yet they are...
And it's like, oh, we're going on this big adventure now. Here we go.
The adventure's beginning again.
Like, oh, okay, well, they're going to go with that place we already know about.
Just follow the red line to the North Pole. And then what happens when they get to the North Pole, Ken?
There's no visibility.
None.
So they crash land.
They do crash land. What happens before then, though?
Oh, I'm sorry. Dialogue on the plane.
The title card that says North Pole.
Yeah, we get another title card.
We get another title card, the North Pole.
Yeah. And then they crash land.
And then they crash land. Right after the pilot talks about how many times he had made that same run and landed just fine.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, the weather is slightly bad, and they crash land, and both pilots are killed.
Well, they even had a throwaway line in there, too, of like, oh, there was like this seismic activity. Maybe something's changed on the runway. And they decided to, the jerk scientists decided to land anyway. So, of course, there's this giant ice.
I forgot that part.
Yeah, there's this giant ice thing in the middle of the runway. So, yeah, they just run straight into it. And it only damages the very front and the pilots, and everyone else and everything else is fine.
I mean, they weren't fine. I mean, like, there was a couple of blinking lights, and there was like a little drip of blood in somebody's forehead.
I mean, the fuselage was still complete.
Oh, yeah, it was perfectly fine, just like it happens in a real plane crash.
Right.
Only like the very tip gets smushed, right?
Yes.
Like a Coke can, just...
Exactly. That's exactly what it looked like.
Exactly.
But they hit it going like, I don't even know. Like
pretty fast, because, I mean, here's the thing.
With speed.
Okay, so even if Dr. Chomsky said, yeah, land, let's land, it was still not a graceful landing.
No.
It was a terrible landing.
It was terrible. And people died.
2 people died.
Yeah.
Including the only black man that I saw in this entire film.
That's also true.
He was one of the pilots, and he had like one line of dialogue.
That's also true.
This is a very... a
lot of pasty white people in this film.
Very ethnocentric film.
Yeah.
Very little representation.
Yep.
And which reminds me, I think Dr. Fletcher's the only woman in the film too. I can't recall another one.
Yeah.
There might have been one in the background somewhere.
Yeah, the only speaking one for sure.
Yeah.
And you know what? That's the other funny thing. They said well, we'll get to that. But basically, at one point, she says, a lot of good men and women died here.
Yeah. No,
I'm like,
I remember like just
where are the hell are these women you're talking
yeah,
about?
what women? I don't
These
remember
are all
seeing any.
dudes.
A lot of like middle-aged, not very fit and balding men as well.
Yeah. Just like we see in the military.
The hairlines are terrible in this film. Let's just, but we'll talk about that another time.
Anyway, so we finally get to the station, and it turns out that right above the hatch, there's a patch of the quote outside that's actually just like some white fluff and some white carpets or towels or something that are thrown around, and they filmed it just straight so you can see exactly how bad the set is.
What's fantastic about this set? It really does. I mean, you can see the lines of where the blankets end.
Yes.
It was so badly done. I could not believe what I was seeing. Not even like in a high school theater production, you can get away with that level of competence or incompetence, if you will. But even a TV movie, like even would a Hallmark TV movie pull such a blunder?
No. They get some freaking snow.
No,
they were literally had a scene where they were outside in the snow earlier in the film. Like literally in the outside, in the real snow. And they couldn't get some like B-roll footage of some snow to like put in there.
It's just amazing. Yeah. So so they're just on a dimly lit set with this hatch sticking up out of these blankets covered in white fluff. It was absolutely atrocious.
Yeah.
That itself is worth the price of admission.
It was wild. It
just
was
that
wild.
one spot.
And like there's definitely a way you could shoot it where you wouldn't see any of that. And it just was going straight on and the camera wasn't even moving. So like it's super obvious.
They didn't even try to hide that.
No. They were just
That's
like,
the most
this is
impressive
fine.
part.
This is fine. So they finally get to the station.
And they go in. Everyone's fried to a crisp.
Everyone died.
They're all dead. The one good makeup effect though was the original commander of the Hubris. They did a great job of charring a dummy or a mannequin or whatever to look like it had been properly electrocuted. Some of the other extras and actors, they just put some like shoe polish on their face.
Yep. Yeah, they didn't. Yeah, none of the other people were visible other than just dirtying them up. The commander's the only one that actually looked like he was fried. So when they pulled him up in the chair, it was like, it was a gross out moment, kind of.
Yeah, like it was well done. That was well done. That makeup effect was well done.
Yeah.
And who knows? Maybe it was actually makeup and not just doing up a dummy. But it was good.
And Brian pointed something else out too while we were watching it, that they came to the station knowing that they had lost contact with these people, and then were shocked when they got in and that all the people were dead.
Like, what did they expect would happen? And so here's the thing. Even if they knew that people might be injured, there was not one medic, there was not one doctor or anything among their little 5-person crew to assist the station, assuming, of course, that the 2 pilots were not the medically trained personnel.
No, they were the pilot trained personnel.
They were the pilot trained personnel. Meanwhile, the 2 doctors on this mission are some kind of scientific doctors, not really medical doctors.
And apparently they brought 2 like torpedo guys.
And a couple of grunts. One of which, I'm glad you mentioned that, is Sean Whalen. Sean Whalen, if you're of a certain age, you'll remember from the Got Milk commercials from the 90s. There's this great scene where a guy's listening to the radio while making a peanut butter sandwich. And they're doing some trivia, and you get a good pan around of his home, and it's just full of Aaron Burr and early American history memorabilia and items. And they ask a trivia question for relating to Aaron Burr. And he's like, oh my God, I'm the perfect man to answer this. So he calls into the radio station to win the prize. But he has so much peanut butter in his mouth that he's unable to communicate his answer to the radio personality, and he doesn't win the contest because he doesn't have any milk. Now, that guy's been in all kinds of stuff since. He was in Men in Black. He was in Twister. Never Been Kissed. He's done a bunch of small roles. Great character actor.
A lot of comedy roles too.
A lot of comedy roles.
He's an expressive face.
And he also looks like he's got like that Steve Buscemi thing where he's like a skeleton, just very loosely skinned and like a little bit of tuft of hair on top. Like he's got the Steve Buscemi thing going. But he's a great character actor. All I'm ever going to think of anytime I see him is it's the Got Milk guy.
Now you're also going to think he's that one guy that was in that one movie.
That one guy in that one movie. No, really not, because even though I've seen all of the other films that I saw him listed in, I don't remember him in any of those movies. I know I've seen him, and I know when I see him, I'm like, oh, it's the Got Milk guy.
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay, I am not going to remember him from this.
Yeah.
Because even after we post this, I'm never going to listen to this podcast again either.
That's fair.
Nor am I ever going to watch that movie again. He's just the Got Milk guy. So the Got Milk guy and his compatriot, they're the torpedo dudes and they doing the tech stuff, and they resurrect this station which was completely wiped out with electromagnetic pulses.
Yeah.
Yes, an EMP pulse is something that these electric eels are capable of producing. Just some fantastic writing in this film, isn't there, Ken?
There truly
fantastic
is.
Writing. Very technical, very accurate.
They thought of everything.
Everything.
So they decide the scientist lady gets to work trying to crack the code of whatever these transmissions are. So she's trying to get the data from the computers. The grunt guys are cleaning up bodies. Then the bad scientist is plotting in the background to try to get authorization to launch more missiles. Basically, he's gone behind everyone's back. But to do this, he needs to have a communications back to the United Nations. So they send one of the guys out to launch a new transmitter.
So the original transmitter was fried in the original attack. So what they need to do is get a new uplink, right? So they send not Sean Whalen, but his buddy that he's with. They put him in a mini sub and then send him to go nuke the ice, to blow up the ice. Well, not necessarily nuke the ice, but torpedo the ice to make a hole so they can put another uplink there, which you immediately pointed out. Why don't they just go through the damn hatch that they all came in and just plop it right there on the surface?
Right, because that would make sense.
That would have made sense and involved zero risk to anybody's life or well-being. But instead, they stick him out there. The eels come. They attack. Shenanigans ensue.
Now, he does get the uplink, though.
He does get the uplink, though.
He launches the uplink right before he gets attacked.
Yes.
So the uplink is complete, but the first expendable guy gets wiped out, basically.
And then the military guy, Captain Rains, gets in Chomsky's face and wants to know, why didn't you just send him up through the hatch?
And I was like, thank you.
And it was because he wanted to provoke the eels to see what they would do.
Right. He wanted justification to go back with to say, oh, they're attacking, so we need to just take them out.
Yep. And because this guy is, I'll give him this, he is absolutely single-minded of purpose in this film.
Yeah.
He just wants to kill these things. He wants to wipe them out. He wants to nuke them. He doesn't care what he needs to make that happen, just as long as he makes that happen, whatever the cost.
Yep.
Would make him a fantastic corporate CEO.
Yeah, I definitely get that vibe. Definitely not as much like scientist guy or like, you know what I mean?
It's almost like he's a doctor of evil.
Almost,
but not quite.
Yeah.
He's not that evil.
It would have made more sense if there was some other military or, like you said, corporate kind of motive for him. That's like more the character he was.
Like a rocket scientist, like a missile specialist scientist, a doctor of missiles,
or even like maybe like the corporate angle was like maybe he was like the geologist and like some company wants to come in and like do something, but that's not the story at all.
Like if the trench that the eels had opened up and built, like contained like really precious materials or minerals,
Or
and that they could come in and like mine.
or like they're producing the heat, and maybe like someone wants to come in and like harness the heat.
A geothermal doctor.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, all interesting ideas that they did not explore. He's just a doctor of something.
Yeah.
We never find out what.
Never explained.
It's just left to, it's funny. They'll reveal everything else to us right away, but they won't reveal what kind of doctor he is. Other than just loosely, just vaguely academic, vaguely militaristic.
Yeah.
And that's all we get. Because he's not just any scientist. Like he's given directive to override the military commander's orders.
Yeah. He's basically in charge.
He's basically in charge by the UN. And I have great respect for the UN, Ken, but the UN doesn't do anything like this.
No.
No. They send peacekeepers to Rwanda while genocides happen, and that's about the extent of it.
That's another reason why it didn't make as much sense to have them as the main political force, I think, behind it.
I mean, considering like the nature of the casting, like you got an Australian lady, you got like an English guy,
Okay.
you got a couple of Russian actors. I mean, they do give that a more international flair, and it makes it a little more marketable to say, your Bulgarian CGI team. So I kind of get that, but just the amount of credit that they give the UN
Yeah.
and like the G8.
The UN in this movie got something done.
Yeah, they got something done. I mean, regardless of whether or not it was completely evil and stupid is beside the point.
Right.
But like the UN decided on something quickly.
Yeah. And then they just did it.
And then they just did it. Like that just never happens.
Yep.
And so this was in 2003. So this film came out the same time that Colin Powell was going to the UN, talking about Saddam's, chemical weapons that they had been hiding and building and stashing and all this other stuff, and we couldn't get a resolution for hardly anything. But if you're going to send 100 nukes into a trench in the North Pole, by God, the UN is going to be 100% behind that.
Yep.
So they get their little uplink communication. He gets his approval to do the deed with the nukes.
Well, and they also, as a result of the previous attack, one of the eels comes into and through the hatch in the bottom of the station.
Yes, the moon pool.
And it establishes some kind of telekinetic link.
A Vulcan mind meld.
With the main scientist lady.
Dr. Fletcher.
Dr. Fletcher. And,
Dr. Fletcher.
So she has this experience where she now understands what she needs to do to make the program work somehow. And she feels like she can communicate with these things now. So she gets to work on that while nefarious scientist man is putting his plan into action.
And so after they're basically told, hey, they're going to be nuking this trench, the ex-husband comes down to Dr. Fletcher's little lab there by the moon pool and is basically just like, hey, like the world's going to end. It's all terrible. We're probably going to die. And then they kind of get like, they canoodle a little bit, and he kind of puts her on the desk, and it's like, like the love scene of the film. But since this was, made for TV and it is probably unrated, they just do a little bit of necking and some bad flirting, and then they talk about going back to work, and then that's the end of that scene.
It's very awkward.
It was the most awkward love scene I have seen. I'm trying to remember. Nothing comes to mind just off the top of my head, but it was incredibly uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It was uncomfortable to watch, and you could tell like the actors were uncomfortable performing that scene.
It's one of those things where someone in a meeting somewhere said, like, we need to check this box off. Like, we need to have a love interest scene.
Where can we just force that in and just wedge it in?
Put that in somewhere where it doesn't make any sense. Let's just do it here. It's like they're alone in a room. They might as well kiss for a little while. And then we just move on.
And then we just move on like it never happened. And I'm trying to remember what happened after that. So I think at that point we try to look at the time and realize like we had another like 45 minutes to go. And we were just like, my God, how are we going to get through the next 45 minutes of this? What else can they possibly have happen in 45 minutes to justify this running time?
And I feel like there's hardly anything even to say about it because the plot becomes so circular. So our heroes decide they're going to get into a sub because the bad guys are gonna launch all the missiles and everything's gonna go to hell. So they're gonna try to communicate with these creatures. They get in a mini sub and head out.
And then Chomsky back at the Hubris, he gets attacked by the eels. And then he says, "Oh, come back! I need to be helped." And so while our heroes, Rains and Fletcher, are discussing how they can use the mini sub to escape all the coming doom and damage, and get back to the surface, and we're like, okay, that's where this movie's going. Okay, we're all for it. They just suddenly decide to go back to the Hubris to save the guy who's been trying to get everyone killed.
Yes. And this is already our third or fourth cycle of the people shoot the torpedoes, the eels come and destroy the torpedoes, and then they attack the station. We've already been through this.
Yeah, we've been through this a couple of times, and we're through it again while this is going on.
We know exactly what's going to happen.
So they go back to the station. They get the guy.
Which is now 50% flooded.
52% flooded.
Yeah.
According to their miraculous computers. And let's just take a moment to talk about the computers in this film, Ken.
Yeah.
So from 2003, for a very high-tech kind of movie, you've got this high-tech base. You've got high-tech equipment. You've got lots of LED lights. You've got chrome ladders. You've got mini subs. You've got CGI water. Now, what kind of computer monitors are you going to have?
Old ass giant computer monitors.
Giant. Made even gianter by some kind of apparatus that they put on top of these old CRTs.
Just to make them look like they're not bought off the shelf, crappy old CRT monitors.
Yeah, so basically they took a bunch of 1980 style huge CRTs, probably beige or the off-white, and then they took this penis-y oval shaped thing and just stuck it on top.
It's like molded plastic.
Molded plastic. I don't even know if I'd go that far. I mean, it's
shaped plastic.
Shaped foam, maybe. They'd probably just use some kind of foam, and then just smoothed it and painted it to make it look like plastic or something. They didn't even try to make it look like metal. But it's funny because there's this little vent on top because you have to let the monitors vent, right? So it's kind of like a boomerang shaped vent on top of this attachment they put on top, and you can see clear as day the old monitor underneath.
Yeah, it's pretty sloppy.
I mean, it's just why even bother? Why even bother?
Because they wanted to have the screens on to flash a bunch of messages and data and stuff like that.
And a lot of them are just plain blue in this. You have a lot of blue screen of death in this film as well.
Or static pictures.
Yeah, staticky pictures and that. Getting back on track here. So they go back to the station. They have some mouthy words with Chomsky. And then Rains is telling Fletcher, "Oh, just let him go." And then, even though they came back just for him, and then she decides to just keep working on her little her translator program.
And she finally gets in contact at this point.
Yes.
She messages them, instant messages them via the computer.
She slid into their DMs.
And they message her back.
They do.
And basically say, this planet that you call Earth is not that. It's this other name. We've been here longer. And basically, this is our planet. We're doing what we need to do to survive.
Yeah, they're not necessarily malevolent, but they're not really friendly either.
They basically just this is what we need to do to survive. I mean, bottom line.
They want to have, they want to propagate their species and spread around the globe, and they want to warm the ice caps up and make, more watery room for them, and I get it.
Yeah. And I mean, apparently they've been hibernating or something. They've been down here for a long time.
A very long time, yeah.
Yeah. So that ends up being what they're up to. So, but she communicates them in the fact that they're not aggressive towards her. Once they understand her, They don't go after her sub or like where she is. They don't attack her
Yeah, she's kind of like off limits after that.
because then they're communicating. So they're like, okay, we're talking to you. They don't want to harm her.
They have a rapport.
They just talk.
They just talk. They just
You know,
chat.
they just little
just
chat
chat.
messages. We have our exposition through chat messages.
So while all that's going on, we get Chomsky to do some more running around, and then he tries to steal the mini sub, and then he succeeds in the mini sub after again shooting shooting live rounds in a underwater pressurized compartment, like you do.
It's also worth noting that the reason he was trying to do all this and stuff is that he convinced the UN people to all send all of their nuclear subs to come in, and they're going to launch all the nukes because, before one or two nukes didn't work, they were too easy to target. Now we're going to send hundreds of nukes, and they're going to enough of them are going to get through. So all of these submarines are all converging on this one point. And when they finally launched the torpedoes, they said the timer is going to be 20 minutes. And I said, surely this must be a mistake. There's no way it's going to take 20 minutes for these torpedoes to get to the trench. But that was signifying that we were going to have to wait
For 20 minutes.
20 more actual minutes.
I actually checked the time. I checked the time when I saw that. I think we were at 1 hour and 9 minutes into the film at that point, and the film length was 1 hour and 32 minutes. So that was roughly accurate to how much longer we had to get through. I mean, it wasn't quite 20 minutes, but it's just amazing that the submarines. I mean, what is the actual effective range of a torpedo? Like in World War II, did they shoot a torpedo that just traveled through the water for 20 minutes?
I have to imagine.
Can a modern torpedo travel through the water for 20 minutes?
I mean, maybe a modern one can, but like, it just seemed like
20
forever.
minutes
is
an eternity. I mean, 10 minutes would be an eternity.
Yeah.
I mean,
because it's moving pretty fast.
Yeah, but I mean, from that far away, if you're going to shoot from that far away, you're giving your enemy untold advantage to shoot it and destroy it before it ever reaches you.
Oh, it's also worth mentioning that the trench was visible to these submarines when they fired.
Yeah.
So there's no way you could see that far to a trench either. That's going to be 20 minutes away.
No. So I mean, like, the scale is off, the time is off, the depth is off. Only the best people worked on this film, Ken.
Yes.
The most technically astute. Like in what wartime battle condition would somebody fire a torpedo to go for 20 minutes?
I don't know.
I mean, okay. So granted, they are nuclear submarines. These are nuclear weapons. So I guess you wouldn't want to be right next to it when you fired. So I mean, that is actually a reasonable consideration. You would want some minimal safe distance, especially if you're going to send 100 of those things.
Yeah.
But I mean, think of the environmental impact of launching 100 nuclear weapons into a trench in the North Pole.
I mean, you got to wonder if it's just as bad as whatever the harm that the eels were causing.
Or worse, because I mean, that's a lot of heat energy released all at once.
And
I mean,
half-life,
Yeah, I mean, that would be radioactive for quite a long time.
Yeah.
I remember a long time ago when I was a kid, I was watching some 2020 documentary or something, and they were talking about a lake in Russia where they had detonated a nuclear weapon in there, and it's going to be radioactive for 20,000 years. Now, granted, in the oceans, there's a lot more circulation and dilution. But even so, 100 nuclear weapons in the ocean, all at once. Just seems like an environmental catastrophe.
So anyway, that's what happens.
Yeah, but that's what happens when the G8 and the UN approve such a measure.
So we're just watching these torpedoes slowly inch towards the target for 20 minutes while all these other things are happening. And, I mean, what do we even want to say about the rest of this film?
The rest of this film it's just a hot mess. It's just a hot mess. There's bad editing in this film. There's one really bad jump cut. When one guy gets electrocuted in the mini sub, His death scene is comically badly edited, and the sound doesn't match up with what he's doing either. The sound on this as well, early in the film, in the original gun showdown in the torpedo room of the Hubris, there was definitely a line of dialogue where that didn't. The last couple words matched up with the guy's mouth, but the rest of it was just all over the place.
Yeah.
And that was a lot like this whole movie as a whole. It was like there was sound, there was things happening. It didn't exactly make sense. It didn't really come together, and the ending is sloppy for sure.
And there was another part too where there was a cut where they made between two things, and they didn't bother to recut the music. They just cut the video with the music again, so that the music was out of place on the second cut.
Yeah.
And then it went back to the correct music on the next view.
And there was also another great scene. I think the last time they introduced the UN with the title card is toward the end of the film, and they just jump in for like 10 seconds. United Nations Command Center.
For one guy to say one line.
Just for one guy to say one line, and then they jump out.
And then now that we've mentioned about the trench a little bit more, my favorite title card of the movie is when we're on the station, which is up in the top of the ice, looking down into the trench.
Yes.
And then when we go down to the trench gets its own title card for another like 3 seconds of a view of a trench.
The trench gets its own title card.
Yes.
It's amazing.
And for nothing to happen, just
for nothing to happen,
a view of it.
Just to see a couple of eels swim towards it. The trench.
Yeah.
Or the
They actually said the name.
Polaris Trench. Yeah. The Polaris Trench.
So that was that was when I realized what a kind of farce the titles for this movie were.
They're pretty bad. Yeah.
Oh, and the one where it zoomed in.
Oh yeah. That was good. And then it became a white background in the snow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was great. So yeah, oh man, just what a wonderful film, Ken.
Yeah.
So we like to cover a certain topics every segment here. So let's talk about the best performance and the worst performance of this film.
This is going to be a real hard one for me today. I think best performance might be like one of the people that just dies because no, not really. I would say what's the name of the guy? The real chisel jaw guy.
Oh, Bud Manstrong. Yeah, that was Captain Rains.
Captain Rains.
Captain Rains. Yeah.
I guess him.
Yeah. See, I would go for I would actually go for Simone McKinnon, who played Dr. Fletcher. Like she gave a bona fide good performance considering what she had to work with.
Okay.
For worst performance,
I mean, they were the two actors in the film, so
they were the two
people that have been in
multiple. Yeah, at that point anyway.
Yeah.
I would definitely say, like, for worst performance, I would say almost the rest of the supporting cast qualifies on this one.
Yeah.
Between, like, the bad wavering accents at the UN.
The first captain
who had, like, super extra facial expressions.
The first captain in the sub and the first captain of the station were both pretty bad.
They definitely were. They were incredibly ham-fisted on this.
The station captain was like trying to channel his like cartoon villain face, and like he succeeded a couple times.
Yes, and then, like with the team that goes down to the Hubris with Dr. Fletcher and Rains, one of the torpedo techs, I can't remember his name. It was a Hispanic gentleman. He also had some incredibly bad facial expressions.
Yeah.
But I liked him though. He was good. He was a good actor.
To me, he wasn't as bad as the.
He was not as bad as some of them.
Yeah, the commanding guy and the generic military people were just terrible.
Yeah, he was a little better. Yeah, but his death scene was terrible. Some of his delivery lines and some of his emoting were just over the top.
All of the people in the submarine had like a look on their face like someone peed in their Cheerios. Like. Nobody was happy to be working on this film in the submarine.
It was not a fun film to make, it doesn't look like.
No. Just a small room, turning some dials, and trying to look serious.
So what would you say the best plot point of this film was?
I would say the best plot point would be how they end up using the station at the end.
That's okay. That's a good one. That's a good one.
I would say that's the most well thought out part, as far as something that makes sense and can give our heroes their, that we won the day. I think that was probably the smartest thing that they did in the film.
Worst plot point?
You don't have anything for best plot point? Or are you just agreeing with me?
Oh, I'm gonna just go ahead and have to agree with you on that one.
Okay.
Because I just don't have much. For worst plot point, I would say just giving the UN its prominence and everything. And another reason why they may have gone with the UN, because I mean, like, we've talked about how like the UN headquarters was like a community college theater. They probably couldn't do anything even remotely passable for an actual like Washington D.C. location.
Yeah, that's true. That would have cost a lot more
That would have actually have cost some money.
to make believable. Whereas you could just have this room where you put a bunch of country flags in the background, and it's like, oh yeah, UN. Of
UN,
course.
yeah, the UN. We'll just have the UN take care of everything in this film.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I would say the worst plot point to me is them going back to the station, like,
Oh, that was terrible
because
too.
we were so ready at that point. It's okay. We're on
For the continuation of the film, yeah.
we're on the little sub. We've escaped the big place. Okay, we're headed towards the conclusion.
Yeah. And then they
But we weren't.
okay, you know what? I'm gonna have to defer to your judgment on that. I think you're right.
I mean, I think
That really is the worst
you were
plot
right
point.
too. But this, as far as
Yeah,
like
but I mean, I think yours carries a little more weight. I think.
we were both just basically like, no, like don't go back. Like, come on, really? This is happening?
It happened.
It did.
It happened.
Unfortunately.
And we sat through it for a number of minutes while
we-
it happened.
We weren't even halfway done at that point, or just barely halfway
Oh,
done.
we were a little more than halfway, I think. I mean, we were like 2/3.
But that should have been the
That should have been like
we're headed to the finish line. Like that should have been the light at the end of the tunnel.
it really should have been. Like you should have had like 10, 15 minutes after that.
Like we're off the station. It's going
You know,
down. It's getting destroyed.
It subverted our expectations.
It sure did.
So, final score and recommendation. Not Rotten Tomatoes. IMDb gives this 2.9 out of 10. Now, normally when I'm like kind of iffy on a film, I'll give it like a 5 or a 6. But usually, like a film I like, I rate it about an 8 or 9. I think the 2.9 rating on this is pretty fair because it was even as bad as it is, there's enough of it that's bad enough that it's enjoyable. But I would never, ever, ever want to watch it again. So definitely below a 4 for sure. It did have some production value. Like it had technology. It had CGI, even if it was terrible CGI. The costumes were decent. The lighting was decent. Cinematography was decent. But the editing was bloody terrible. So maybe a 2. I'd give it a 2 out of 10.
Yeah. I that's exactly where I'm at. I think 2. Just because it's not the worst movie I've ever seen. So it's definitely, there was very little that I was interested in this movie. Like I was looking for things to make fun of the entire time because that's what kept me from being.
That's what kept you engaged.
That's what kept me out of crippling depression.
Yeah, because
basically.
I could not watch this film and care about any of the characters.
No.
I didn't care what happened at the end. I didn't care about what was going to become of anybody.
Even the good guys didn't have enough depth to their characters to like really care about what was going to happen to them. I mean, you kind
Incredibly
of knew.
superficial.
You knew too. I think this was a movie where like the main two people were like really never in danger either. Like everyone else was in danger way more than they were.
And all the time at that.
The only time they were in danger was basically when, at the end. That's basically it.
Yeah, they were never really imperiled.
So, they just, it was just really bad. The effects were really bad. The first time we saw the eels, I knew that I was in for suffering for the majority of the rest of the film, and especially when the first one came out of the water, and you got like just a real good close up of it. I was just like, this is so bad.
So they're electric eels too. And if anybody has seen the first Hellraiser film, there's some like electrical type of bolts in that film as well. And those were all hand animated by Clive Barker and another gentleman over a weekend while they were drinking, as the story goes. And those looked a lot better than these.
Yeah.
And this movie is what, 16 years later?
I think this movie could have been, because I think the actual stage, the set for the,
Hubris?
yeah, the set for the Hubris was actually pretty good on the inside.
Yeah, it was decent. You know, I mean, I definitely...
It was complicated enough. There was different rooms where you knew where they were. As soon as you could just see where they were at.
Yeah,
you kind of had a feeling for how all the rooms were connected, and it did seem like a place, you know? I felt like that was probably the strongest part.
It was a believable set for sure. And it was... It definitely had that late 90s sci-fi vibe. Mm-hmm. Because I was telling Ken, you know, going into this, I knew nothing about it, not even what year it was made. I personally would have placed this film about 1998. And if it had actually been made in, like, say, 1998 or 1997, I might be a little more forgiving on some of its technical faults.
I mean, maybe it was a leftover set from those times.
Possibly, but I mean, also just the bad CGI. I mean, they were making CGI at that level.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Like years before, it should have been just a little bit more polished up at that point.
Yeah. But I think if they would have made the exterior shots all models, especially for the station and for the craft and the submarines and all that kind of stuff, it actually I think would have held up better for time.
Oh, sure.
Than what they did with the CGI. They should have just made as little CG as possible, and you really relied more on models.
Yeah, they really got away from models like at the end of the 90s, and they moved toward the cheap CGI, and we're still in that era.
Yeah.
We're coming out of it a little bit.
Yeah.
Like they're starting to use practical effects a little bit more, but CGI has been just, I don't know, I think it's been one of the worst things that happened to sci-fi cinema.
The problem is people don't know when to use it and when not to use it, and that's the real problem. It's if you have someone who knows where the line is, what things you should have a physical thing for, and make a smart decision about it, not just say, oh, well, we want to make it look shiny, or, you know, we have the budget, let's do it, you know?
So Tron, the first film to use CGI, really, that was a technical masterpiece, and that film holds up well today because of the way that it was implemented. Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. There's a sequence where they showed the Genesis probe in action on a dead planet. That's a fantastic use of CGI. There are many instances where it can be done really well, like Battlestar Galactica, the reimagined series in the early 2000s. That used a lot of CGI.
Yeah.
Well, granted that, was well financed, but they did a passable job with their CGI. And it just kills me that they did a better job of CGI in like the 80s and the early 90s than they did, over a dozen years later.
Yeah. This one was obviously, the people who did it just didn't know how to make anything look believable. And it just looked...
It's just interesting seeing how CGI has developed at different times in different parts of the world. It's almost like they're all learning from scratch.
But like also they could have made those monsters shadowy, kept them in the shadows for a while.
They should have.
Instead of just, they put them all like direct light, like right away where you could see everything about them. And that was really the problem. They could have kept half of this movie more in the shadows and it would have looked way better. To show less.
Which is funny because of how darkly lit a lot of these sets were.
Yeah.
Like they definitely were going for that vibe, but they didn't use it in some of these other instances. And it makes me wonder.
Yeah.
Did they know how to do the CGI for the shadowy monsters?
Because the rest
they did in the film in the ocean, but not in the buildings.
The rest of the stuff outside and underwater is supposed to be like under the ice, so there wouldn't be a lot of light down there.
Almost none.
So
especially at the North Pole,
it wouldn't make sense to have brightly lit
anything.
Yeah.
But there you go.
What else do we have here?
I think that's about it, Ken.
That's it. I guess that was the rating, huh?
That's the rating.
Oh man.
So that wraps up another segment of Complimentary Cinema here at the O&M Stockroom. We're your hosts. I'm Brian McGarry.
And this is Ken O'Malley.
Thank you for tuning in. The links for this film are going to be in the description below. Please leave your comments and feedback if you watch this film. Let us know what you think. and have a lovely week.